At Sunday dinner, my daughter Ellen set a brass key on the table beside the butter dish and said, "Dad, Lorraine needs this more than you need pride." The key made a hard little click against the wood, my fork stopped halfway to my mouth, steam was still rising off the pot roast, my grandson kept tearing his dinner roll into tiny pieces without looking up. Lorraine rested her hand near the key, not touching it yet, but close enough to claim the space around it. That was the moment I understood something had already been decided without me, and the room was never going back to what it had been 10 seconds earlier. My name is Walter Boone. I am 76 years old, and for most of my life I believed the cruelest thing that could happen to a man was to lose his wife. I no longer believe that. The cruelest thing, at least in the years after, may be to remain alive long enough for people to confuse your grief with incompetence, your quiet with decline, and your need for dignity with stubbornness. My wife, June, died when I was 71. Pancreatic cancer. Fast at the end, slow before that. The kind of illness that teaches your house new sounds, pill bottles rattling in the bathroom drawer, the low hum of the oxygen machine at 2 in the morning, the soft drag of slippers down the hall when the person wearing them is trying not to wake you because she does not want you to see how much effort it takes to cross one room. June and I were married 43 years. 43 years is long enough for another person's habits to move into your body. I still woke before dawn because she liked the coffee started by 6. I still folded kitchen towels into thirds because she said they stacked better that way. Even after she was gone, I still slowed the car at the corner by St. Mark's because she always liked to look at the church sign, even when the sayings were bad. The first year after she died, I did not do well. I am not ashamed to say that now. Men of my generation are supposed to speak of grief like it is weather. Rough patch. Hard season, something you bear with your jaw set. But grief was not weather, it was indoor fog, it sat inside the rooms. It got into the silverware drawer, the couch cushions, the closet where her blue cardigan still hung behind my winter coat. I would stand in the kitchen with one hand on the counter and forget why I had come in. Not because my mind was going, because every simple act still expected a witness. You may know that feeling, not just missing a person, missing the way your own life once sounded when somebody else was in it. My son David, worried, my daughter Ellen, worried more loudly. She has always been the efficient one, lists. Calendars, follow-up calls. She meant well, which is how many family invasions begin. At first the concern was normal, "Dad, did you eat? Dad, did you call the plumber? Dad, are you sleeping?" Those are fair questions after a funeral, fair questions after a year of casserole stops and the real loneliness begins. But time did what time sometimes does if you leave it alone long enough. It did not heal everything. I do not trust that phrase. It sanded some edges. It returned structure. I stopped leaving the television on for noise. I put the oxygen machine away. I cleared the top of June's vanity, though I left her perfume bottle in the back corner. Because I was not ready for the bathroom to smell entirely like soap and shaving cream. Then I made a life with a shape to it. I am a retired high school principal, I have always trusted routine more than inspiration. I began waking at 5:30, not because I had to, but because the hour before sunrise belonged to nobody else. I would pull on my gray robe, shuffle into the kitchen, and start the old percolator. While the coffee climbed toward a boil, I opened the back door and stood on the porch in my slippers. The porch boards had one loose plank near the railing. It clicked under my heel every morning. Beyond the fence, the maple tree in my yard held birds like a secret. I would drink my coffee from the chipped green mug June bought at a craft fair in Vermont back in 1998. Then I would sit in the den and read history. Not memoir. Never memoir. Around 10 I would walk 2 miles if my hip was behaving. After lunch I worked in the basement workshop. I was not a master craftsman, but I liked wood because wood answers honestly. A warped board does not flatter you. A good cut does not lie. I made a small side table, then a bookshelf.
Then a toy chest for my granddaughter Molly, sanded smooth as river stone, with brass hinges and a cedar smell that stayed on my hands all day. By 74, I was no longer merely surviving. I was steady. That is different from joy, and at our age steady is not a small thing. But the world gets nervous when an old widower becomes steady alone. People prefer a cleaner story. Either you are heroically moving on or tragically giving up. Very few people can tolerate the truth that some older men build a decent life in the quiet and have no wish to turn that quiet back into negotiation. Ellen would come by on Thursdays with groceries I had not asked for and stand in the doorway of the den, looking at me over the tops of her sunglasses, like she was inspecting a property. "You can't spend every evening down here, Dad. I'm reading." That's not the same as living. Living. That word started being used around me the way salesmen use upgraded. Not descriptive. Persuasive. At church, a woman named Bethany from the bereavement group touched my sleeve and said, "It's lovely that you're keeping busy, Walter, but a man shouldn't harden into solitude." At the hardware store, Earl Simmons from 3 streets over leaned on his cart and told me, "My cousin started dating at 78. Best thing that ever happened to him. Got him out of the house." Out of the house.
No one asked whether I wanted to be out of the house. They assumed the house was the problem. Then, 2.5 years after June died, Ellen brought Lorraine Maddox to my driveway barbecue without warning me. Lorraine was 70. A widow too, brown eyes, silver hair cut in a careful bob, coral lipstick, and a laugh that arrived half a second before the joke. She wore a navy cardigan, despite the heat, and carried a glass bowl of potato salad, as if she had been expected. Maybe she had. Just not by me. Ellen said it very casually. Lorraine lost her husband 3 years ago. I told her you two might have a lot in common. You hear that phrase a lot after 65. A lot in common. Usually it means two people are roughly the same age and still breathing. But Lorraine was easy to talk to. That was true from the beginning. She asked about the toy chest I was staining in the garage. She asked about June without making a ceremony out of widowhood. She said her late husband, Martin, had once tried to install a ceiling fan and somehow turned off the power to the whole street. I laughed. She did too, and not in the careful way people laugh around grief, as if they are afraid the floor will give way. A week later she called. Ellen had given her my number. That should have bothered me more than it did. The first conversation lasted 15 minutes, the second went nearly an hour. We met for coffee the following Thursday at a place with laminated menus and booths deep enough to hold older bodies comfortably. Lorraine wore a pearl-colored sweater and asked if I always stirred 2 packets of sugar into my coffee before tasting it. "You're observant," I said. "I pay attention," she said. At the time, that sounded like warmth. To a man who has spent years being looked at mainly through the lenses of pity, caution, or administrative concern, attention can feel like sunlight. I will not lie to you. For the first few months, there was pleasure in being chosen again. Lorraine admired the way I dressed. She said I still had a principal's voice, the kind that could quiet a room. She liked that I sent proper thank you notes. She liked that my lawn was edged. She said most men our age had either gone soft or gone strange. When she said that, I felt something old and masculine straighten its back. We went to dinner. We drove to a small museum in Hartford. We sat in the park one cool afternoon with paper cups of cider and watched young parents chase children through leaves. Lorraine touched my wrist while she was talking, and I had not realized how long it had been since another adult reached for me without obligation. You may understand that too. At a certain age, touch becomes medical, familial, accidental. A hand on the shoulder in passing. A nurse adjusting a cuff. A grandchild climbing into your lap for 3 distracted minutes before running off. To be touched again as a man, not a patient or a grandfather, can stir up a dangerous gratitude. Ellen was delighted. David was relieved in the quieter way sons are relieved, by asking fewer questions. Friends at church smiled when Lorraine took my arm. "There he is," Burroughs said one Sunday in the fellowship hall, "back in circulation." Social proof is a powerful thing, especially when you are older and everyone around you seems to agree that your life is finally correcting itself. The approval comes from all directions. Your children stand taller. Neighbors speak to you with a new lightness, even the grocery cashier starts saying things like, "Well, good for you." And because the room has agreed, you begin to doubt your own hesitation. Maybe they're right, you tell yourself. Maybe companionship is not disruption. Maybe peace was only a waiting room. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was smaller, which is often how trouble enters. Lorraine began by improving things. She brought soup when I had a head cold. She noticed the front step wobbled and asked if I wanted the number of a handyman. She changed the batteries in my smoke detector because I mentioned, only once, that the chirping one in the hallway had startled me awake. Then, she began making little corrections. She moved my vitamins from the kitchen cabinet to a tray by the refrigerator. "So you'll see them." She rewrote the shopping list on a magnetic pad in larger letters, just easier on the eyes. She set reminders in my phone for my blood pressure medication. "Only in case you forget." The reminders were not offensive by themselves. That is the subtlety of power when it wears a cardigan and speaks gently. It does not arrive declaring itself. It enters as convenience. It enters smiling. It enters carrying soup. One Tuesday afternoon I came upstairs from the basement with sawdust on my sleeves and found Lorraine and Ellen standing at my kitchen counter, heads bent over a calendar. Neither had told me Ellen was coming. Lorraine tapped a date with her fingernail. "His stress test is here, and I told him he shouldn't drive back alone if they dilate his eyes." Ellen nodded. "I can take him, or you can." I was 3 feet away when she said him. "Not Dad. Not Walter. Him." I asked, "What exactly are you two deciding?" They both looked up too quickly. Lorraine smiled first. "Nothing important, just making sure you're covered." Covered. Another clean word. Families and new partners love clean words when the real subject is authority. "I had the appointment written down," I said. "Of course you did," Ellen said, too fast, too cheerful. "We're just helping coordinate." You start hearing a pattern after a while, just helping, just checking, just thinking ahead. Every sentence sounds harmless until you notice the direction of movement. Decisions begin sliding an inch at a time away from you. A ride gets arranged before you ask. A refill gets discussed before you mention it. A room full of concern gathers around your life, and quietly mistakes access for permission. I still could have stopped it early. That is true. But older men are often trained by love and loss to tolerate discomfort if it keeps the peace around the children. We know our daughters are tired. We know our sons are distracted. We know people call less often than they should, and then overcompensate when they do call. So we let a few things pass. We tell ourselves they mean well. We tell ourselves one conversation would sound ungrateful. Then the thing grows. By the 6th month Lorraine had a drawer in my bathroom, not a large one. The bottom right. Hairbrush, hand cream, a little bottle of lavender lotion that made the sink area smell like a gift shop. She left a pair of beige flats by the mudroom bench. Then a second pair. My house had started speaking in a mixed accent. I noticed other changes too. The morning quiet was gone whenever she stayed over. Lorraine liked a radio on low in the kitchen, then louder once coffee was poured. She liked to talk before sunrise, not about anything urgent, just the ongoing braid of nieces, sales at the market, somebody's gallbladder, a neighbor's divorce, whether my den curtains made the room look sad. Sad. My den had been my best room for 4 years. Once, while I was reading after lunch in my leather chair, she lifted the book right out of my hand and said, "Come sit outside. You can read any time." At 76, any time is not a real word. Time is no longer one large field. It is a series of usable windows, and you protect them or you lose them. I began feeling a mild dread around the phone. Lorraine liked contact, good morning calls. Midday check-ins. Little questions with no real answer. Have you had enough water? Did you mail the tax form? What color shirt are you wearing tonight? If I did not respond, she filled the silence with concern. If I still did not respond, Ellen got a text. One afternoon I was in the workshop fitting the back panel onto a cabinet for my granddaughter's room. The clamp was tight. My reading glasses had slipped halfway down my nose. I had that rare, satisfying concentration when the world narrows to wood grain and measurement. Then my phone buzzed on the tool bench. Once. Twice. 3 times. When I finally wiped my hands and looked, there were 2 messages from Lorraine and 1 from Ellen. Call us. You left your landline off the hook. I had not left anything off the hook. I had turned the ringer down. That was the first moment I felt not cared for, but monitored. Hidden inside Lorraine's tenderness was a different hunger, one I did not name correctly until much later. She liked to be needed, yes. But more than that. She liked to be central. She liked being the one who knew where I was, what I had eaten. Whether I had taken my pill, what the doctor had said. Ellen liked that too, though for a different reason. It calmed her fear. Between them, my life had become a project with color-coded concern. Then came the practical conversations. Lorraine said my basement stairs were an accident waiting to happen. Ellen wondered whether the yard was too much house. David asked if I had ever considered a condo closer to people. Closer to people is another phrase older adults should be careful with. Sometimes it means community. Sometimes it means supervision with better landscaping. I still told myself no harm had been done, but harm does not always announce itself as an emergency. Sometimes it arrives as a gradual repositioning of your chair in your own life until one day you look up and everyone else is speaking as if they are at the head of the table. That day came in October. Sunday dinner at Ellen's. Pot roast. Buttered carrots. My grandson tearing apart a roll. Lorraine in a burgundy blouse, sitting a little too comfortably beside me. As if the family arrangement had already been redrawn in ink. We had barely begun eating when Ellen reached into the pocket of her cardigan and placed a brass key beside the butter dish. I knew that key immediately. It was the spare from the ceramic bowl near my back door. My chest went cold before she said a word. Dad, she said, Lorraine needs this more than you need pride. I looked at Lorraine. She did not look startled, she looked prepared. What is that doing here? I asked. Ellen folded her napkin and laid it across her lap. You forgot to answer your phone twice last week. We talked about this. We did not talk about giving away keys to my house. Lorraine placed her fingertips near the key and said, Walter, please don't make this into a scene. A scene. That word is how people turn your objection into the problem. David stared at his plate. My grandson stopped tearing the roll. The clock over Ellen's stove made a dry ticking noise I had never noticed before. On the sideboard behind her, a glass bowl of wrapped mince caught the light. I said, who decided this? Ellen answered, the people trying to help you. There it was. Not concern, not discussion, not even persuasion. A coalition. And the most frightening part was not the key itself. It was understanding that if I did nothing in that moment, the next decision would come faster. Then the next. Access becomes precedent, precedent becomes entitlement. Before long, your children and the woman they say is good for you are discussing your pills, your money, your driving, your rooms, your future, all with the soft confidence of people who no longer think they need your permission. I reached for the key. Lorraine's hand moved first. Not quickly, not violently, just enough for her fingers to cover the brass, to claim it with the calm of someone who believed the room was already on her side. And that was the instant something inside me stopped yielding. I stood up, placed both hands flat on the tablecloth, and listened to my own chair legs scrape backward across the floor. I stood up, placed both hands flat on the tablecloth, and listened to my own chair legs scrape backward across the floor. No one spoke. The room held its breath the way rooms do when a quiet man finally moves. For several seconds I did not reach for the key. I let my palms rest on the tablecloth, feeling the weave under my fingers. There were small crumbs near the butter dish. A ring of moisture from someone's glass had soaked into the fabric. Ordinary details. It helped to notice them. They kept the moment from turning into theater. Lorraine's fingers still covered the key. Ellen was watching my face carefully, trying to read which direction this would go. You may know that moment too. When the people around you believe you will either submit politely or explode emotionally. They are ready for both of those outcomes because both keep the power exactly where it is. What they are rarely prepared for is clarity. I looked at Ellen first. You said Lorraine needs this more than I need pride. That's not what I meant. No, I said calmly, that's exactly what you meant. You just hoped I wouldn't notice. She opened her mouth and closed it again. Then I looked at Lorraine. Take your hand off my key. She did not move immediately. Walter, she said softly, this is just so someone can check on you. That sentence, I said, is doing a lot of work. My grandson shifted in his chair. Lorraine slowly lifted her fingers from the brass ring. I picked up the key and turned it once between my fingers. The metal was warm now from her hand. Then I placed it in my coat pocket. No one tried to stop me. The room felt different already. Not louder. Not friendlier. Just honest. Ellen leaned back in her chair. You're overreacting, she said. That's possible, I said.
But let's test that theory. I sat down again, folded my napkin beside my plate, and looked at both of them. Since June died, I said, I have managed my house, my appointments, my meals, my bills, and my life. Have I missed a mortgage payment? No, Ellen said. Have I forgotten to pay my taxes? No. Have I crashed my car? No. Have I been hospitalized because I forgot medication? No. Each answer came quieter than the last. I nodded once. Then we are not discussing an emergency, we are discussing comfort. Lorraine crossed her arms lightly. Walter, you live alone. Things happen. They do, I said. Then I leaned forward slightly. But things also happen when a man slowly gives up the right to run his own life because everyone around him feels nervous. Ellen sighed. You're twisting this. We're trying to make sure you're okay. That's not the issue. I paused, the clock ticked again over the stove. The issue is that decisions about my life are now being discussed between other people before they are discussed with me. David looked up for the first time. That's not entirely fair, he said carefully. I turned toward him. When did you first hear about this key? He hesitated. Last week. And when were you planning to mention it to me? He did not answer. That silence told the story better than any argument. You see the pattern eventually if you live long enough. The people who love you begin forming a small council around your life. At first it feels like protection. Then it becomes administration. Finally, if you allow it, it becomes authority. And the strange thing is that none of them believe they are taking anything from you. They believe they are solving a problem. But dignity is not a problem to be solved. Lorraine cleared her throat. You're making this bigger than it is. I'm making it clear, I said. Another quiet settled over the table. Then I said something very simple. If you want to help me, ask me first. No one moved. So I said it again, slower. If you want to help me, ask me first. That sentence changed the temperature of the room. Because it did something small, but powerful. It returned the starting position of every conversation back to where it belongs. With the person whose life is being discussed. Lorraine shifted in her chair. But what if something happens and we can't reach you? That's a fair question, I said. Then I leaned back and folded my hands. And it deserves a fair answer. This is the part older men often skip. They defend themselves emotionally, but they forget to provide structure. Families panic when there is no structure, so they create their own. Sometimes badly. I said, here's how this works from now on.
Ellen's eyebrows lifted slightly. First, I continued, if you are worried about something specific, you ask me directly before you discuss it with anyone else. No one argued. That includes medical appointments, my house, my money, or anything involving my daily life. Lorraine started to speak, but I raised a finger gently. Second, I said, concern does not equal control. Ellen looked down at her plate. If you call and I don't answer, I continued, that does not mean you assemble a committee. My grandson looked up briefly and smiled into his napkin. Even David chuckled once. Then I added the part that mattered most. If a decision involves my life, I make the final call. Lorraine exhaled slowly. That sounds nice in theory, she said. But people your age sometimes don't see things clearly. That sentence would have made me angry 5 years ago. Now it simply made the situation clearer. Lorraine, I said, do you know what makes older men stop trusting people? She did not answer. It's when help starts arriving with ownership attached to it. No one interrupted, so I continued. I enjoy your company, I said, but my life is not a project. She looked down at the table. For the first time since dinner began, Lorraine seemed unsure of the room. Ellen finally spoke. So what are you saying? I'm saying something very simple. I lifted my glass and took a small sip of water. Then I set it down carefully. I'm saying I'm not giving anyone access to my house, unless I decide to. The words sat on the table like a weight. Lorraine looked at Ellen, Ellen looked at David. David shrugged once. No one argued. And that is something worth remembering. Very often the authority people assume around you survives only because you never clearly remove it. The moment you do, the room recalculates. Dinner continued after that. Not warmly, but honestly. The pot roast cooled. The carrots went untouched. My grandson asked if anyone wanted the last roll. Ellen cleared the plates too quickly. Nobody mentioned the key again, but the air in that kitchen had changed. And sometimes that is enough for a beginning. Over the next few weeks, I did 3 small things, none of them dramatic, none of them angry. Just practical. The first thing I did was change one habit. Every Sunday afternoon, I called my children myself. Not to report, to connect. That small shift prevented the quiet fear that fills silence when families don't hear from you. When people hear your voice regularly, they stop imagining emergencies. The second thing I did was clarify a boundary. One evening Lorraine asked about keeping a key. I said calmly, I appreciate the concern, but my house keys stay with me. No argument, no apology, just clarity. She did not ask again. And the third thing I did may seem ordinary, but it changed more than anything else. At my next doctor's appointment, when the nurse began asking questions while looking toward Ellen, I smiled and said something simple. Please ask me directly. Not rude, not defensive, just direct. You would be surprised how often people adjust the moment you remind them where the conversation belongs. Months passed. Lorraine and I eventually drifted apart. Not because of one fight, because the center of gravity changed. When you stop allowing people to manage you, the ones who needed that role begin to lose interest. Ellen still worries, she always will, but she calls instead of organizing. David visits more often. My grandson likes the toy chest I built. And my house remains quiet in the mornings. At 5:30 I still stand on the back porch with my coffee. The loose board clicks under my heel. The maple tree still holds birds like a secret. And the silence that once frightened everyone around me has become something else entirely. Not isolation, not decline, just space. Space to live at my own pace. Space to make my own decisions. Space to remain, even at 76, the owner of my own life. Because aging does not remove your voice, it only tests whether you still use it. And sometimes the most powerful shift in a family happens with a sentence so simple it barely raises your pulse. If you want to help me, ask me first. That one sentence can quietly return an entire life back to its rightful owner.